From the fall of Paris to Ragnar's demise, here's the real significance of the seer's prophecy from the Vikings series. So, hop on the longboat as I explore the meaning and significance behind his most important predictions. The seer was like a one-man minority report, high up on the ladder in Katagatian society. And he was no ordinary horoscope writer either. He didn't just give vague predictions about your love life or your new haircut. No, he saw some seriously terrifying and beautiful things through his mind's eye. And because of that, the seer had a pretty complicated relationship with his gift, which added some depth and nuance to his character. But let's give the seer some credit, shall we? He was a great guy, even if everything he did wasn't historically accurate. In fact, creator Michael Hurst made no secret of the fact that the show blends fact, fiction, record, myth, and legend to create its own unique world. And that's part of what makes Vikings so charming. But even with all the creative liberties taken, it might surprise you to learn that most of what the show tells us about the seer and the Viking priest class is pure fiction. Even the character's habit of licking the seer's hand was an ad-lib that just kind of stuck. But hey, it's such an oddly specific chunk of behavior that it just had to be true. And despite the seer's lack of historical accuracy, he still played an important role in the show. In a world where life and death are equally cheap, where men and women live and die by the sword, there's little room for careful interpretation. But the seer brought all of that and more to the table. As viewers, it was always fun to try and decipher the meanings behind his cryptic utterances. Not only did the characters believe in the truth of his powers, but the writers did too. And why shouldn't they? The seer's the real deal. He always seemed to know more than he was letting on. Even if he said something, you just knew it wasn't the whole thing. And it's not just me saying this, the guy admitted it himself. Remember when he told Ragnar, "I do not lie about what I see. Only sometimes I withhold things, for human beings cannot bear too much reality." Yeah! But see, even these half-truths hold a lot of meaning. For instance, take his final meeting with Jarl Borg. Jarl became Ragnar's enemy in the show's second season, and the seer told Borg he could see an eagle hovering above him, and that he himself was an eagle. Jarl took this to mean he was destined for greatness and power, and you can't blame him, because that's what the seer made it sound like. However, as we all know, the eagle was a sign of Ragnar's impending attack. Jarl was eventually blood-eagled to death by Ragnar, with an eagle soaring above his head. It was a clever twist of fate that showed just how cunning the seer could be. Another example of the seer's cryptic messages came when he spoke to Rollo. Rollo was often consumed by bitterness and jealousy, and the seer's words provided a glimmer of hope for the troubled warrior. He told Rollo that if he only knew what the gods had in store for him, he'd go down now and dance naked on the beach. Rollo, being Rollo, took this message to heart, which ultimately led to his journey to Paris, where he was crowned a Frankish king. It was a victory that was hard-won, with much betrayal and heartache along the way. But it was a testament to the power of the seer's words. So he wasn't merely handing out predictions, he was also making them happen. And if Rollo's case doesn't convince you, just look at his brother Ragnar. Ragnar received a prediction from the seer about Paris that was both vague and ominous. The seer told him, "Not the living, but the dead," would conquer the city. This was a message that could be interpreted in a number of ways, but it ultimately led to Ragnar faking his own death in order to surprise the Parisian king and win the day. Ragnar leads a group of Vikings raiders to Paris, and despite his lack of knowledge about the city, he has Sinric, a wanderer who could speak both languages, which helps him communicate with Parisians. The Vikings attempt to attack the city, but their attempts fail, and Ragnar's injured in the fighting when he jumps from the ramparts of the city. To trick the Parisians into thinking they've fulfilled their request, Ragnar has the people of the city baptize him. Then he fakes his death, is placed in a wooden casket, and taken into the heart of Paris for a Christian burial. Once inside the church, Ragnar springs up from his coffin, threatens the emperor, kills a priest, and takes Princess Gila hostage. Eventually, Ragnar lets her go as his soldiers who accompanied him open the gates, enter the city, and sack it. This victory fulfills the seer's prophecy. It was a clever ploy, but it also raised the question of whether the seer's predictions were truly prophetic, or whether they simply provided a framework for the characters to act upon. After all, it's no secret that Ragnar was always heavily influenced by the Christians and their outlook, and this religious influence shapes his life and legacy in several ways. Ragnar forms a strong friendship with Athelstan, the monk he sold into slavery after slaughtering most of the inhabitants of Lindisfarne. Then he formed a kinship, or kingship if you will, with the always cunning and deceitful King Ecbert. And in the end, Ragnar proved to be just as two-faced, using his own violent death as a means to sick his sons and their armies upon the treacherous monarch. By the end of Ragnar's life, he'd renounced the gods, his society's supernatural traditions, and dismissed the seer as a con man. The seer predicted that Ragnar wouldn't die until the blind man saw him, which he scoffed at. But much later, when he was taken to his execution by a blind man, he felt vindicated when he didn't die instantly after being seen. The last thing Ragnar saw before being thrown into a pit of venomous snakes was the robed figure of an incognito King Ecbert. Was he the blind man? Blind to Ragnar's last move against him? The look on Ragnar's face didn't suggest that he'd recanted his rejection of the gods, but it was a look that certainly seemed to say, "Oh." Now, with all that in mind, what's the verdict? Is the seer really all that? His predictions added an extra layer of depth and tragedy to the characters' story arcs, and the prophecies create a sense of inevitability, but also leave room for interpretation and speculation about how they'll come to pass. And it's interesting to see how the characters react to the prophecies, whether they try to fight against their supposed fate or accept it, and try to make the most of their remaining time. But one thing is for sure, almost everything the seer said was important in one way or another. Even when the prophecies didn't come true in the exact way they were predicted, they still had a significant impact on the characters and their journeys. Like the time the seer said that Floki would have to suffer great pain. It was assumed that it would be related to his personal life, but it ended up being about his loyalty to Ragnar. And the conflict between them resulted in Floki's imprisonment and torture. So overall, the seer's prophecies created a sense of anticipation and heightened the stakes for the characters as they tried to navigate their own paths while being aware of the looming fate that awaited them. So, from the fall of Paris to Ragnar's demise, that's the real significance of the seer's prophecy from the Vikings series.